Now let us configure remote desktop on that machine. No matter whether you rented a server from any infrastructure provider and install CentOS, or if you have your own server with CentOS setup on it, you can actually follow these instructions and configure remote desktop. If you already have remote desktop on your machine, you can skip this and you can move forward. Okay, that being said, in case if you have a remote server and if you want to set up remote desktop, first thing you need to make sure is either you should have root access or you should have a user with sudo capability with root permissions. Okay, if you have either of them, you should be able to follow these instructions and set up remote desktop on the server. So by default, when we install CentOS on this machine called NS558734 blah blah blah, it actually comes with minimal installation of CentOS. Okay, that's why we are able to connect to this machine using password, and we logged in as root and we can do whatever we want on this machine. But if you want to access through a graphical user interface, because it is on a remote machine, it's not in your laptop, it's not straightforward to connect to it. Okay, with Windows, the minimal installation includes the graphical user interface, and hence you can use remote desktop and you can connect to a remote Windows machine. But with Linux, if the Linux is set up with minimal installation, then first you need to install the graphical user interface. Once you have installed the graphical user interface, you need to have a service that is running on that machine so that we can leverage that service and get a remote desktop for us, and then we can connect to that machine using remote desktop. And the client which we will be using is typically VNC. Using VNC, you can actually connect to an instance of VNC server running on the remote machine, which will give us access to remote desktop. That being said, it involves multiple steps. First, we need to make sure we have installed the GUI components, and then we have to install something called VNC server on that machine, and we have to configure VNC server for each of the user. And then on your PC, you have to have something called VNC client to connect to the remote desktop through an instance of VNC server. So if you want to visualize, it will look like this. You can see here. So you have a bare metal server with OS, which is CentOS 7 on top of it. On this, we will be installing GNOME, which is nothing but a GUI. And to access that, you need to have a VNC server for each user who want to connect. And then using that VNC server, which will be running on a port, each user should be able to connect through VNC server to the remote desktop. Okay. So first, let us start with setting up the remote desktop. The way you can do it is by using group install GNOME desktop, which will come in a moment. But when I log in, you can see that there is a warning, and I want to fix that warning. The way you can fix that warning is by updating environment file with these entries. Okay, and save it and come out of it. And now if I exit and if I log in again, it will not prompt me for it will not prompt that error here or warning here. You can see the warning which we got earlier is not coming now. Okay, and then instead of using root, I will be using a user called training. So I'm creating a user called training here. Okay, for each user who want to connect to remote desktop, we have to start VNC server after installing GNOME desktop. So first step is to create users. If the user does not exist for the guy who want to connect to this machine through remote desktop. Once the user is created, I am setting the password here. Okay, I have set the password for this user, and then I'm adding this user to a group called wheel. wheel is nothing but the group which will contain admin permissions. So whoever is added to wheel will get sudo access to root. So going forward, I can log in as training and I should be able to run commands using sudo. Okay. And by default, if I try to log in as training, if I want to run sudo command, it will prompt for the password. This is the default behavior. I don't want to it to prompt for the password whenever I run sudo commands for the users who belong to this wheel group. For that, I'm actually opening a file called vi sudo, and you can see that this is enabled and this is disabled. So if we actually disable this and enable this, it will let us it will let the users who are part of the group wheel to sudo without prompting for the password. Now if I update this and come out of this, and if I exit and log in again, and if I run sudo ls-ltr, it doesn't prompt for the password going forward. Okay, so I have enabled passwordless sudo permissions for the users who belong to the group wheel. Once we have that, going forward, I'll be using user training only, not root. As I'm going to use training, not root, I have to copy paste this password, copy paste that command using sudo. Okay, and then it will install GNOME desktop for you. GNOME desktop is pretty heavy package and it will take time to download and install. And if you look at the command, we are using a command called yum. Yum is nothing but a package manager on Red Hat distributions, which will download the softwares, install those softwares, and start the services with the default configurations. All those things are automatically taken care using yum. Even if you are using Windows, if you want to install a software, you have to download a exe or MSA file. You have to double click and then you have to perform the installation. Once the installation is done, you might have to start the service to use it. In this case, if you use yum, depending upon how the software is provided to you, they will let you to download that software, install that software, and also start the relevant services for the software with the default configurations. Okay, in this case, that is going to happen with respect to GNOME desktop. There will be all the softwares on this machine after this command is executed successfully. Not only that, after downloading all the softwares, it will install, and once it is installed, it will actually take care of starting the relevant services so that we can actually use the graphical user interface on this machine. And you can see there are 1034 packages that needs to be downloaded. As of now, it is still downloading. Once the download is done, it will actually get into the installation and it might start few services, and after which we have to go ahead and set up the remaining components, and I will demonstrate as we proceed further. Now you can see downloads are done and it will perform the installation of those softwares. You can see it have downloaded 1034 RPMs. RPM is nothing but Red Hat Package Manager. Now it is installing all those 1034 RPMs on this machine. Once this is done, it will also start few of the services to support the GNOME desktop. Now you can see installation is also done. Once the installation is done, it might start few services. As the installation is done, it is actually verifying whether the installation is properly done or not, and then it actually start the few of the services. So first it has downloaded the softwares, then it actually installed those 1034 softwares. Now it is actually validating whether the installation is done properly or not, and then it will start few relevant services with respect to GNOME desktop. Now the installation is done. You can see here everything is successful, there are no errors. Okay, as the installation is done, first thing you need to do after installing GNOME Desktop is you have to reboot the machine. So in this case, either you can use the init6 or reboot. Okay, and again, because we are using training as user, we have to use sudo and then either use init6 or reboot. Now it will take some time to reboot. Wait for a minute and then you log in, and then we will actually go to the remaining steps to complete setting up of remote desktop. Let us try logging in. It will prompt for the password. I think it is not yet ready. Let me see if I can ping this. Okay, it is not yet ready, so we have to wait for some more time. Now I am able to ping the server, and hence I am logging into this server. And we'll actually go through the steps to complete the setting up of remote desktop. Okay, so I have already explained most of this. Unlike on our PC with OS like Windows, we might not need GUI for daily activities because we are directly accessing with the computer in front of our eyes. But when it comes to remote servers, if it is Windows, we typically use remote desktop, whereas with respect to Linux servers, once we set up GNOME Desktop, you have to set up something called VNC server. You have to configure that for each and every user who want to connect via remote desktop, and we have to take it from there. So the next step is we need to set up the VNC server on that remote machine.